I watched from the back of the venue, my hands clutching the gift I had spent weeks preparing, as a man in a tuxedo wheeled over a silver trash can, placing it where my name card once sat. My seat. My son's wedding. My heart cracked wide open as laughter echoed across the hall. And when I asked why, my daughter-in-law smirked and said, "It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic." They say motherhood is a quiet, selfless devotion. You give and you give and you give, expecting nothing. And most days, I didn't. But that doesn't mean I deserved nothing in return. My name is Teresa Alvarez. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and a retired seamstress. My hands have stitched wedding gowns, birthday dresses, even the curtains that hang in my son's house to this day. I built a life with my late husband Jorge, full of small sacrifices and quiet joys. We never had much, but we had enough to raise one beautiful boy, Samuel. Oh, Samuel. He came into this world with a cry that shattered silence and a smile that melted every worry I ever had. From his first scraped knee to his college graduation, I was there. Every single moment. Even when I had to skip meals just to afford his textbooks. Even when I worked double shifts hemming gowns so he wouldn't have to take student loans. He was my reason. My pride. So, when he introduced me to Julia, I smiled. She was poised, confident, the kind of woman who entered a room like she owned the air in it. A corporate PR specialist with a firm handshake and eyes that looked past me, not at me. Still I smiled. Because Samuel loved her. When they got engaged, I offered them the down payment for a house. Jorge had left me his pension, and though it wasn't a fortune, it was enough. I took $80,000 and wrote a check with trembling hands. Samuel kissed my cheek and said, "You're the most generous woman I know, Mama." Julia barely nodded. It's strange, isn't it? How people remember grand gestures, but forget who made them. I began to notice the distance soon after. Calls became texts. Visits turned into quick drop-ins. Julia preferred their space, and I respected it. I didn't want to be the clingy mother-in-law. God forbid. I only asked to be included. But that inclusion. It faded like daylight in winter. Slow. Cold. I didn't realize I was being erased until I was already gone. The wedding planning began, and with it came a shift so subtle it hurt more than a slap. I offered to help. Julia insisted they had it covered. I asked about dress shopping. She said it was just bridesmaids and her mother. I asked what color I should wear. She responded, "Anything neutral. We don't want to clash." Neutral. As if my existence itself had become an inconvenience to her color palette. Still I held my tongue. I bought a soft dove gray dress and matching heels. I embroidered my own shawl. Cream lace with tiny pearls. I wanted to look elegant. Respectful. Like a mother should. The night before the wedding, I wrapped the gift I had been preparing for weeks. A hand-sewn quilt, made from pieces of Samuel's childhood clothes. His kindergarten shirt, his prom tie, the hem from the suit Jorge wore when he held our newborn son. Each square was a memory. A lifetime in thread. I placed it in a box, tied with a ribbon, and wrote a note. "For the home you'll build together, may it be warm with love and stitched with kindness." Mama, the morning of the wedding, I arrived at the venue early. Too early. I was nervous. I asked a staff member where my seat was. Row 1, seat 3. Right behind Julia's parents. My heart fluttered. I stood in the back, watching the final touches unfold, the flower arrangements, the candles, the gold-rimmed plates. And then I saw it. A man in a tuxedo, likely part of the catering staff, wheeled out a silver trash can. Clean. Shiny. It looked oddly deliberate. He placed it directly in the first row, where my name card should have been. I walked closer, confused. Then I saw Julia's bridesmaid, Tessa, the giggly one, snap a photo and burst into laughter. I reached the seat and found no name card. Just a folded napkin with 2 words scribbled in bold marker, Mama Drama. The air rushed out of my lungs. I looked around for Samuel. I saw him across the hall, adjusting his cufflinks. I rushed over, heart pounding. "Samuel," I whispered. There's a trash can where my seat should be. I think it's a mistake." Before he could answer, Julia swooped in. Lipstick perfect. Eyes sharp. "Oh, that? Don't be so dramatic, Teresa. It's just a little joke. Lighten up." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "It's just humor, Mama. We thought you'd find it funny. Like ironic." "Ironic?" I asked, voice trembling. "To replace me with garbage?" Julia rolled her eyes. "We didn't replace you, Teresa. It's just symbolic. You tend to cause tension. We didn't want stress on the big day." And just like that, I realized something so clear it burned. They didn't want me there. Not really. Not in the photos. Not in the memory. Not in their perfect storybook ceremony. I walked away before they could see the tears. I stood in the parking lot, alone. The soft dove-gray dress I had carefully chosen now felt foolish. The heels ached. My embroidered shawl slipped from my shoulders like dignity unraveling. I sat in my car, quilt still on my lap, and I sobbed. I didn't go back in. Not for the vows. Not for the first dance. Not even to say goodbye. I drove home, quilt still in my hands, every stitch now soaked in grief. And that night, as I sat at my kitchen table in silence, I made a decision. They wanted to joke about me? Replace me with trash? Fine. Let them laugh. But I would show them what it really means to be discarded, and what happens when the one they underestimated finally stands up. Because I may be 72. But I'm not done yet. I woke up the next morning with puffy eyes and a heart as heavy as the quilt still folded on my lap. It was still there, right where I had placed it the night before, like a sleeping child. I had poured so much of myself into that gift, thinking that maybe, just maybe, they'd hold it and feel the love sewn into every seam. But no. They gave me a trash can. My phone vibrated around 8 a.m. I stared at the screen. Samuel calling. For a second, I hoped. Maybe he realized. Maybe he was calling to say, "Mama, I'm sorry. That was cruel. You didn't deserve that." I picked up. "Hello." There was a pause and then, "Hey, are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Not "what they did was wrong." Just "are you okay?" As if I had stubbed my toe, not had my dignity publicly discarded. "I'm fine," I said flatly. "How was the wedding?" He hesitated. "It was beautiful." Julia looked stunning. "Everyone had a great time." I waited for more. Something. Anything. "That's nice," I replied. "I told Julia you were upset about the joke," he added. "And what did she say?" "She said you're too sensitive. That it wasn't meant to be personal." I closed my eyes. Not meant to be personal. They'd replaced my seat with a trash can and written Mama Drama on a napkin, but it wasn't personal. "Samuel," I whispered, "did you know they were going to do that?" He was quiet. Too quiet. "You knew," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't think they'd actually do it, Mama. It was just something Tessa joked about." Julia laughed and I didn't think it was serious. "You stood there and let them humiliate me." He exhaled heavily. "It wasn't like that. You always find a way to make things about you. This was supposed to be our day." There it was. The final stitch in a truth I hadn't wanted to face. My own son saw me as a burden. An embarrassment. A leftover from a life he'd outgrown. I hung up. And I cried again, but this time, not from hurt. From anger. All those years. All those sacrifices. All those holidays I spent alone so they could vacation in Tulum. All the casseroles left at their doorstep when Julia was sick. The $80,000. The silence. The constant dimming of myself to avoid drama. And now I was garbage. I looked down at the quilt. My hands were trembling again, but not from sadness. I stood up, took the quilt to my closet, and carefully placed it in a cedar chest beside my wedding photo. Let them live in their curated little world. They didn't deserve this gift. Not anymore. I didn't leave the house for a few days. I ignored texts. I declined calls. Julia eventually sent a single message. Hope you're feeling better. Let's not dwell on things. We're on our honeymoon. As if I had caught a cold. But there was one person I did want to speak to. Rosa Morales, my neighbor and old friend. Rosa was a retired family attorney, the kind who wore long skirts, red lipstick, and always carried a notebook like it held the world's secrets. She had known me for decades. She was there when Jorge passed. She helped me write my will. And more importantly, she knew things about property, inheritance, and rights. I invited her for tea. She arrived that afternoon, wearing her leopard print scarf and a look of concern. "Teresa," she said, hugging me tight. "I saw the photos online. But I didn't see you." "I wasn't in them," I replied. And as we sipped mint tea and munched on dry biscuits, I told her everything. About the joke, the napkin, the phone call, the silence. She didn't say much at first. She just listened. Then finally she asked, "Do they know what you've given them?" "They know." "No," she said firmly, setting down her cup. "Do they really know?" "I gave them the down payment for their house," I replied. "I co-signed the loan. I paid the property tax the first year. I gave them furniture when they moved in. I even sold Jorge's watch to help cover their backyard wedding upgrade." Rosa's eyes darkened. "And was any of that in writing?" I paused. "No. It was family." She took a breath, then pulled out her notebook. "Teresa, I love you. But now you need to love yourself. You've given and given and given. But it's time you protect what's yours." "What do you mean?" "I mean we're going to go through your finances, assets, and legal options. Just in case. Because you may not be done being disrespected." I looked at her, startled. "You think they'll try to take more?" "Let me ask you something," she said gently. "Did they ever say thank you for the money?" "No." "Do they include you in financial discussions?" "No." "Have they visited since the wedding?" "No." She leaned forward. "That's not family. That's opportunism." Her words hit me like thunder. I had spent so long excusing the little slights, brushing off the cold shoulders, pretending it was all just Julia's personality or Samuel being busy. But Rosa had ripped off the veil. I had been financing my own erasure. We spent the next 2 hours going over documents. I found the deed to my house. I still owned it outright. Rosa made a note to help me secure it through a trust so no one could pressure me into selling or signing it over later. She asked about bank accounts. I had one joint account with Samuel, set up years ago so he could help me in emergencies. But lately, he'd started making transfers without telling me. A new patio here. A rental car there. Rosa's eyebrows arched. "We'll be removing him from that account." I nodded slowly. Then she said something that gave me chills. "Let me look into the house you helped them buy. If you co-sign that loan, there may be records we can trace. And if there's any sign of misuse, you may still have leverage." I stared at the photo on my mantel. Me holding baby Samuel on his first birthday, frosting on his cheek, my smile wide with pride. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I just want to stop being invisible." Rosa reached across the table and held my hand. "Then let's make you seen again." That night, I opened an old journal. I began to write, not letters to Samuel or Julia, but to myself. Letters of remembrance. Of all the ways I had shown up for others. Of the nights I'd worked until my fingers bled. Of the meals I'd cooked and never ate. Of the birthdays I spent alone because they were too busy. Of the quilt that no one would hold but me. I wrote until the ink smudged beneath my tears. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. There's something strange about silence when it becomes your friend. After Rosa left, the house felt quieter, but not empty. I moved through the rooms slowly, touching picture frames, running my fingers over old keepsakes. For years, I had filled this house with things for them. Toys from Samuel's childhood, Julia's favorite cookies I kept stocked in the pantry, a guest bedroom I repainted 3 times just in case they visited. They never did. Not after they got what they wanted. I stood in the doorway of that guest bedroom and stared at the untouched quilt on the cedar chest. For a moment, I almost grabbed it and marched down to their house. I wanted to bang on the door and shove it in their hands, force them to look at what love actually looked like. Not words, not money, care. Real, patient, enduring care. But I didn't. Because I realized something that night. I'd been screaming silently for years. With gifts. With support. With sacrifice. And they had learned not to listen. They had learned to take. So now, it was time I remembered the woman I used to be. The one I was before I became Mama, Teresa. The one who makes things easy. Back when I was 21, Jorge and I opened a small tailoring shop together. Stitches of Love, we called it. I ran it for 36 years. I saved marriages with emergency dress fixes, restored heirlooms, and made gowns that walked down generations of church aisles. Women trusted me with their bodies and their dreams. I never had to scream to be seen then. My work spoke for me. How had I forgotten that version of me? That strength? Rosa returned the next day with a folder in her hands and an expression that said everything I didn't want to hear. I looked into the deed of Samuel and Julia's house, she said. You were never added to the property title. You co-signed the loan and contributed funds, but Julia had her name added later, and not yours. I blinked. So they took my money and made sure you had no legal claim. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. All this time I thought at least I helped them build something. That if they ever sold the house, maybe they'd offer to repay some of it. Rosa shook her head. They never intended to include you. They accepted your generosity and protected themselves from accountability. I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered, they knew exactly what they were doing. Yes, Rosa said gently. They did. I spent that week reorganizing my life like a woman reclaiming stolen time. First, I went to the bank with Rosa. We removed Samuel from the joint account. I opened a private account and moved most of my savings into it. The young banker asked if I wanted to notify the secondary party. No, I said with a tight smile. Let him be surprised. Next, we met with a trust attorney Rosa knew. A young woman named Amelia with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She looked at my assets, my home, my pension, my small investment portfolio Jorge and I built over decades, and said, we can put everything into a living trust under your sole control. That way, no one can pressure or manipulate you into changes later. I thought of how Julia once joked at Thanksgiving. You know, Teresa, when you're gone, we'll probably sell this place and buy a condo near the coast. As if I were already dead. I signed the papers that day. Every signature felt like a stone lifted from my chest. But despite all of it, there was a shadow inside me I couldn't shake. One afternoon, I was sitting in my garden. My sanctuary. The lavender bush Jorge had planted buzzed with bees. The roses leaned lazily toward the sun. I sipped coffee slowly, wondering why this ache in my chest refused to leave, even after the paperwork, the changes, the newfound control. That's when Rosa arrived with something that nearly brought me to my knees. A printed screenshot. Julia's Instagram post. There they were, Samuel and Julia, arms wrapped around each other in the golden Cancun sunset. Caption: Here's to building a life surrounded by love, laughter, And only the people who truly support us ring dizzy below it? Comments. One caught Rose's attention at Tessa Bridesmaid. OMG, remember the trash can moment, rolling on the floor laughing, legendary at Julia_Queen. Oh, she actually left. Talk about taking it personally. Hashtag no drama zone. I felt like I had been slapped. Rosa clenched her jaw. They're laughing at you. Publicly. I couldn't respond. I just looked out at the lavender and wondered how long they'd been this cruel. Had it been years? Was I just too kind, too hopeful to see it? But Rosa leaned over and said something that changed everything. They want you small, Teresa. Forgotten. That's why they joke. That's why they exclude you. Because deep down, they know you're the kind of woman who could run circles around them if you chose to. I let her words sink in. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to erase me. I decided then, I wasn't going to fight back with anger. I would fight back with presence. The next day, I got a haircut. Nothing drastic. Just a fresh trim and a rich auburn color to replace the grays. I pulled out my old sewing machine and began making dresses again. Not for clients, not for family, but for me. I stitched deep into the night. Soft cotton. Clean lines. I made a beautiful teal dress with a cinched waist and hand-embroidered cuffs. Then I did something wild. I signed up for a community art class. The first day I walked in, there were mostly younger women. They looked surprised. But the instructor, a kind woman named Eliza, smiled and said, "You must be Teresa. I've heard good things." We painted for 3 hours. I didn't say much. But at the end, Eliza walked over and looked at my work. "You paint like someone who's been holding in stories for years." I smiled. "You have no idea." A week later, Samuel called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mama," he said. "We're back from the honeymoon. Did you have a nice time?" "Yeah. It was great. You know, we thought maybe we could come over for dinner soon." "Oh, yeah." Julia said maybe it's time we all just moved past it. You know, the wedding thing. I waited. "And you're willing to move past it?" I asked, calmly. "Yeah. I mean, I know you were hurt, but it was a joke. It wasn't meant to be so serious. We want things to go back to normal." Normal. Normal meant me shrinking. Me giving. Me cooking while they scrolled on their phones. Me paying while they rolled their eyes. Me being invisible in my own life. "No," I said softly. "I don't think that's going to work for me." He went quiet. "Mama, I love you, Samuel. I always will. But if you want to see me, you'll come with respect. And Julia will apologize. Not in passing. Not in a text. To my face." His tone changed. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I'm being seen." Then I hung up. And for the first time in decades, my heart didn't tremble. It beat. Steady, strong, and free. The next few days passed like a calm after a storm, not because the clouds had disappeared, but because I had stopped letting them block my sun. I woke up when I wanted. Made fresh coffee and toast. I tended to the roses and started reupholstering an old armchair Jorge had bought me in 1978. The fabric was worn, but the bones were still good. Kind of like me. I worked on it with slow, careful hands, pulling out old nails and tightening the frame. Every tug and staple felt like therapy. A restoration of things forgotten. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out a cabinet, I found a photo of Samuel at age 7. Missing front teeth, arms wrapped around my neck, both of us laughing so hard our eyes were closed. I pressed the picture to my chest. I missed that boy. The one who used to leave me hand-drawn notes that said, "Best mama in the world." The one who used to beg for one more bedtime story, who once spent all his allowance to buy me a plastic ring at the school fair. But that boy was gone. And the man who replaced him had let a woman humiliate his own mother, and called it a joke. I didn't hear from either of them for 2 weeks. Not a word. And honestly, that was fine. I wasn't waiting anymore. Instead, I was growing. I finished the teal dress and wore it to a small church gathering. Everyone complimented it. I even got a smile from the widower who played guitar in the choir. I smiled back. I signed up for a local sewing circle again, where I met women my age, some twice widowed, some newly single, others simply bored. But all of us had stories stitched into the fabric of our lives. We swapped tales and patterns. I laughed more in that first session than I had in months. At one meeting I shared my story. Well, most of it. I left out the trash can detail. I still wasn't ready to say it out loud. But when I spoke about being cast aside, about giving too much and receiving silence, one woman named Beatrice nodded so deeply I thought her neck might snap. My son hasn't called me since his second child was born, she said. I found out about the baby on Facebook. The room went quiet. We looked at each other. Dozens of women who had given everything, only to be slowly erased. That day, we didn't just sew. We witnessed each other. It felt like breathing for the first time. Then came the knock. A sharp, familiar rhythm on the front door that made my stomach twist. I opened it to find Julia standing there, sunglasses perched on her head, a manicured hand gripping her designer tote. Behind her, Samuel looked tired. Not guilty. Just inconvenienced. "Hi," she said flatly. I stepped aside. "Come in." They walked into the living room like visitors at a museum. Careful not to touch anything. Samuel glanced around. "You've been redecorating?" "No," I said. "I've just been reclaiming." They exchanged a look, as if I had spoken a foreign language. "We wanted to talk," Julia began, voice too chipper. "Clear the air." I nodded, waiting. "I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding," she continued. "The wedding was emotional for everyone. And you've always been, well, sensitive. So maybe things felt more hurtful than they were meant to." I didn't respond. She continued. "I mean, yes, the seat joke was in poor taste. But it wasn't meant to exclude you. It was just light-hearted." Samuel chimed in. "Mama, you've always taken things to heart. Julia didn't mean anything by it. It wasn't malicious." I felt a strange calm settle over me. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. My journal. I flipped through a few pages and read aloud, softly, November 12th. Julia laughed when I brought over pumpkin pies and said, "Oh, don't bother next year. My mother's are store-bought and better." February 18th. Samuel asked for help with their mortgage. I wired $2,000. Julia didn't say thank you. Said nothing at all. June 3rd. I called 3 times. No answer. Julia texted back. "We're busy. Please stop calling every few days. It's overwhelming." I closed the notebook and looked up. I have pages like this going back 4 years. Julia's smile had vanished. Samuel looked away. "I kept track not to accuse you," I said, voice trembling, "but to remind myself that I wasn't imagining it. That I wasn't crazy or dramatic or oversensitive. That what I felt was real." They said nothing. "Julia," I continued, "you don't have to like me. But you do have to respect that I am Samuel's mother. That I helped build the life he has. That I deserved a seat at that wedding. Not as an ornament or a joke, but as a woman who mattered." Silence. Samuel finally cleared his throat. "So what do you want? An apology?" I looked him in the eyes. "I wanted an apology 2 weeks ago. Now, I want honesty. Did you ever intend for me to be part of your life again?" He faltered. "Of course," Julia cut in. "Look, we came here because we thought it was the right thing to do. But if you're just going to guilt us, then leave," I said. Her eyes widened. "This is my home. You don't get to walk in here and rewrite the past to make yourselves feel better. Julia stood. I told you she wasn't ready to move on. Samuel rose too, but slower. Mama, this isn't the woman I remember. No, I said. Because that woman let people walk all over her. This one doesn't. They left. I didn't cry. I made tea. And I sat by the window as the light fell softly on the armchair I had reupholstered. It was beautiful. It was mine. The next morning, I received an email. Not from Samuel. From Julia. Subject: about the house. Teresa, we noticed you removed yourself from the joint account. That was unexpected. Also, I assume Rosa has been advising you? Just so you know, the down payment you gave us was a gift. It doesn't entitle you to anything. We're consulting with our own advisor to ensure there are no misunderstandings moving forward. Best, Julia. I read it twice, then once more. Not a single line of remorse. Only veiled threats. I forwarded the message to Rosa. She replied in minutes. Perfect. Now we document everything. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not rich. I'm not powerful in any worldly way. But I have something stronger than any of that. I have truth. And for the first time in years, I also have boundaries. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about identity, worth, visibility. And I wasn't going to be erased again. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed the sun felt warmer. Not because the temperature changed, but because I no longer walked through my home feeling like a ghost in someone else's life. The spaces that once whispered memories of dinners missed, phone calls ignored, and visits that never came, now hummed with a quiet kind of peace. I had finally made space for myself. And yet, there was still one thread left dangling in the fabric of my story. Samuel. No matter how many papers I signed or trust accounts I secured, there was still that ache inside me. A mother's ache. The kind you can't sign away with ink and counsel. It didn't want to hurt anymore. It wanted to understand. One day, I stood at the window with a cup of tea, watching the wind sway through the trees, when I saw Samuel's car pull into my driveway. Alone. I didn't move. Didn't hurry to the door like I used to. I waited. Let him knock. Then knock again. Only after the third try did I open the door. Hi, Mama, he said softly, hands in his jacket pockets. His eyes were tired. Not just physically but soul-tired. I knew that look. Hello, Samuel, I said, keeping my voice level. Can I come in? I paused, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, taking in the changed furniture, the fresh scent of roses from the vase on the kitchen counter, the art canvases I'd leaned against the hallway wall. You've been busy, he murmured. Yes, I said simply. Living. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to serve him arroz con pollo and wipe his sticky fingers. But now he looked unsure. Small. I sat across from him and waited. After a few moments, he finally spoke. I didn't come to argue. I wanted to understand. I raised an eyebrow. Understand what? Why you cut me off. Why you removed me from everything. The accounts. The will. The trust. I let his words sit between us like thick smoke. You want the truth? I asked. He nodded. I leaned forward. Because, Mijo, you stopped treating me like a mother and started treating me like an obligation. And your wife, she treated me like a punchline. He flinched. You let them laugh at me, Samuel, I continued. At your wedding. In front of friends, family, strangers. And when I cried in the parking lot, you didn't follow. You didn't call. You didn't come. His eyes welled up. I didn't know it had hurt you that much. I blinked slowly. That's the problem. You didn't think about how it would feel at all. He dropped his head into his hands. Julia said it was funny. Said I should stop worrying. That I always made excuses for you. She doesn't know me, I said. And you forgot me. He looked up, tears streaking his face now. I didn't mean to. I was trying to build a life. To keep things peaceful at home. She doesn't. She doesn't handle tension well. And so you offered me up instead. He covered his face. I was a coward. I didn't respond. He needed to sit with that truth for a while. When he finally looked up again, I saw the boy I once knew flicker behind his eyes. I know I can't undo it. Any of it. But, do you think there's a way back? I took a slow breath. That depends. On what? On whether you want me in your life. Or just want back what I gave you. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Because deep down, I think he didn't know yet. And I wasn't going to make that choice for him again. After he left, I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I sat at my sewing machine and began a new project. A long burgundy coat with a velvet collar. Heavy. Elegant. It was the kind of thing you wore when walking away from a place you never planned to return to. I didn't know where I'd wear it yet. Maybe Paris. Maybe the corner store. Maybe just in my backyard, watering tomatoes. But I'd wear it like armor. The next day, a knock came at the door again. But it wasn't Samuel. It was a young woman, maybe mid-30s, holding a toddler on her hip. Her face was nervous, but kind. Are you Teresa Alvarez? She asked. I am. I'm so sorry to bother you. My name is Elena. I'm a social worker at the senior center downtown. I run the community outreach for elderly mentorship and legacy projects. I blinked. Legacy. She smiled. Yes. We've been gathering stories, artwork, recipes, pieces of wisdom from women who've lived full lives. Your quilt? It's been the most talked about submission we've ever had. I felt my heart flutter. People have asked to meet the woman who made it, she continued. To hear her story. Would you be willing to speak at our upcoming event? Share what you've learned? I stared at her. Me. The woman who had once been laughed out of her own son's wedding. Now being asked to teach. I nodded slowly. I'd be honored. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Not just my speech but myself. I revisited my journals. Looked at the photos. Wrote down lessons I'd never had the chance to share. I wrote one final letter for that night. Not to be read privately, but publicly. A love letter to women like me. Discarded, dismissed, and then reborn. The evening of the event, I wore my burgundy coat. The center was full. Not stadium full, but enough to matter. Rows of people. Older women, young mothers, college students, even a few men. Some clapping, others watching with curious, respectful eyes. When they called my name, I walked up slowly. The lights were soft, the podium warm beneath my hands. I unfolded the letter. And I read. I was once told I was too sensitive. That I made too much of things. That I should laugh at being humiliated and call it love. But love doesn't mock you. Love doesn't replace your seat with a trash can and ask you to smile. Love shows up. Love remembers. Love respects. And when it doesn't, you learn to give that love to yourself. To stop waiting for invitations. To stop begging for space. You build your own table. You pull up your own chair. And you say, I belong here. My name is Teresa Alvarez. I'm 72. I've been invisible. I've been laughed at. But now, I am louder than I've ever been. Not in volume, but in presence. The room was silent. Then someone stood. Then another. Applause rose like thunder. I stepped back from the microphone, heart full. Not from validation, but from release. I had found my seat again. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I claimed it. It's funny, the things people assume about women like me. They think we'll stay quiet because we're old. That we'll keep forgiving because we've always forgiven. They think we'll stay quiet because we're old. That we'll keep giving until we're emptied out like a purse turned upside down. But I wasn't empty anymore. I was full. Of truth. Of clarity. Of peace. After the legacy event, something in me settled for good. The applause wasn't what stayed with me. It was the quiet conversations afterward. The woman who said, "Your words saved me." The teenage girl who whispered, "I wish my grandmother could hear this." And then there was Elena, the outreach worker, who hugged me tight and said, "You don't realize what you've started." I didn't. Yet. But I would. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Samuel. "I heard about your speech. Julia saw the video online. It's everywhere now. She's not happy." I stared at the message for a long time. Julia wasn't happy. After all this time, all this silence, all this disrespect, that was what mattered to them. Not my pain. Not my dignity. Not the strength it took for me to stand up after being so cruelly knocked down. No. Julia wasn't happy. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't going to shrink for her comfort ever again. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was Rosa, with 2 cardboard boxes in her arms. "Time to finish what we started," she said. We spent the next 4 hours cleaning out a cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Old receipts, half-written letters, holiday cards from people who no longer remembered me. And then, tucked behind a faded recipe book, we found it, a handwritten note from Jorge. I hadn't seen it in decades. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. "Mi amor, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But I want you to remember one thing. You are the glue that held us together. You are stronger than you realize. Don't ever let anyone silence your light. Not even our son. Especially not him. Con te do mi amor." My eyes filled with tears. Rosa put her hand on mine. "He knew." I nodded. "He always did." The next day, I received an invitation in the mail. Cream envelope. Silver script. Baby shower, Julia and Samuel. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I was surprised, but because I realized something I never expected to feel. Nothing. No ache. No sting. Just emptiness. The kind that comes when you've grieved for something so long, it finally stops hurting. I placed the envelope aside. Didn't tear it. Didn't keep it. Just let it go. And I whispered to myself, "That's not my celebration." That weekend, I went to a small bookstore cafe where Elena had arranged a reading circle. They had requested that I come and read from my journal. I almost said no. But something inside me said, "Share it. Speak it. Let it breathe." I walked in, wearing the burgundy coat again. The weight of it made me feel grounded, anchored in myself. There were a dozen women. Some young, some old, some with children at their feet. Each one with a different face, but the same tired eyes. I read passages softly, carefully. I told them about the wedding. The napkin. The trash can. They gasped. One woman cried. Another said, "They should be ashamed." But I didn't want pity. So I told them what came next. The trust. The account. The coat. The speech. The freedom. And when I finished, the youngest girl in the room, no older than 16, stood up and asked, "Do you still love your son?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. "But now I love me more." That night, I got a voicemail from Samuel. He didn't sound angry. He sounded hollow. "Mama, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Julia's upset all the time. She says I'm weak. Says you're manipulating people to feel sorry for you. I defended you, and now we barely speak. I think I messed up. I know I did. I don't know how to fix it." I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Because healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, it means letting the wound scar over and keeping the lesson. The next morning, I visited the cemetery where Jorge was buried. I brought a small rose bush I had grown from the garden he planted decades ago. I trimmed the edges, cleaned the stone, and sat beside him. "I think you'd be proud of me," I whispered. "I finally stopped waiting to be loved the way I deserved. I gave that love to myself." The wind rustled the leaves gently, like a soft applause. "I still miss him," I added, speaking of Samuel. "But I don't miss being erased. And that's growth, isn't it?" I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. I felt whole. That evening, I walked through my home slowly, room by room. I didn't see ghosts anymore. I saw a woman who had risen from ridicule, who had built a fortress out of sorrow and turned it into something sacred. I stood in the kitchen and brewed tea, set one cup down for myself, and smiled, because I no longer needed a seat at anyone's table. I had built my own, and it was beautiful. There's a moment, late in a woman's life, when she realizes she was never weak. She was just quiet. And that silence was mistaken for permission. I had spent most of my years making space for others, giving, stretching, dimming. I had given my time, my money, my identity, until I was nothing but a shadow hovering behind everyone else's joy. But now I stood fully in the light. A month after Samuel's voicemail, I received a card in the mail. Not a fancy envelope this time. No gold foil or perfumed edges. Just a simple white card. Handwritten. From Samuel. "Mama, we had the baby. A girl. Her name is Camila. Julia said not to send you anything. Said you didn't care. But I couldn't let another moment pass without telling you. I saw a quilt in the maternity room. A bright, colorful one someone donated. It made me think of yours. The one you made for us. The one I never opened. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But if one day you want to meet Camila, I'll make sure there's a seat for you. Love, Samuel." I stared at the card for a long time. Camila. A granddaughter. My chest tightened, not from pain this time, but from something more complicated. Possibility. I didn't respond right away. Because for once, I wanted to make a decision that wasn't rushed by guilt or old instincts. Instead, I sat with it. I imagined the baby. Tiny fists, wide eyes. A new life untouched by old wounds. Could I enter that space? Could I hold her without reopening everything I had closed? And more importantly, did I want to? The answer came one morning while watering the garden. I looked at the roses Jorge had planted. The way they bloomed year after year, even after storms. Even when neglected, they still grew. Because life insists on blooming, even after betrayal. I called Rosa that afternoon. "I'm thinking of going to see the baby." She paused. "Do you feel strong enough?" "I don't feel fragile anymore," I said. That evening, I opened the cedar chest, pulled out a bundle wrapped in old lace. A second quilt I had started long ago, back when I still dreamed of being a grandmother. Soft pinks, gentle yellows, white stars embroidered on every third patch. I hadn't finished it, but now I would. Not for Julia. Not for Samuel. For Camila. A child who didn't ask to be part of a bitter legacy. A child who, maybe, could know me on my terms. The visit was quiet. Private. I asked Samuel to meet at a park. Neutral ground. No Julia. No house filled with memories that still stung. When he arrived, I saw the fear in his eyes. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you've already lost something precious, and hoping maybe it isn't too late. He carried Camila in a sling against his chest. When he stepped close, he asked softly, "May I?" I held out my arms. And the moment she was placed in them, Something inside me cracked and mended all at once. She was warm. She was soft. She was real. I whispered to her, "You don't know me yet. But you will." Samuel sat beside me, quiet. "I've been going to therapy," he said. I didn't know how much of my own shame I was carrying. I let Julia speak for both of us because I didn't want to cause conflict. "But silence is its own kind of cruelty," I replied gently. "I know that now." He looked at me. "She doesn't know I reached out. She wouldn't have approved." "Then she still doesn't understand." He nodded. "I won't be disrespected again," I said plainly. "You shouldn't be." I turned toward him. "I'll be in Camila's life if, and only if, it comes with honesty, boundaries, and respect. No games. No public humiliation passed off as jokes." He swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you?" He looked down. "I'm trying." "That's all I'll accept," I said. "Trying." Truthfully. We sat for an hour. Talking. Sometimes just watching the breeze play with Camila's little curls. I didn't promise anything. I didn't offer to babysit. I didn't gush. I showed up as a woman who had earned her peace, and was willing to protect it. When he stood to leave, he said, "I don't deserve a second chance." And I replied, "No, Samuel. But your daughter deserves a first one." He nodded, tears threatening. Then he turned and walked away. I watched them go. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I'd been left behind. Because I wasn't standing in grief anymore. I was rooted in choice. That night, I finished the quilt. I stitched the final patch with the words, "Made by a grandmother who remembered her worth." Weeks passed. Samuel called occasionally. Always respectfully. Sometimes just to say Camila had laughed. Or rolled over. Or held his finger a little tighter than yesterday. He never asked for anything more. And I never gave more than I wanted to. That was the new rhythm. Boundaries and grace. One evening, I hosted a small dinner. Just 6 women from the legacy circle. Rosa included. We sat around my reclaimed dining table, drinking wine and eating arroz con pollo the way Jorge used to love it. We laughed. We cried. We toasted to becoming women who no longer waited to be invited, but who created our own space. And at one point, Rosa stood and raised her glass. "To Teresa," she said. "The woman who reminded all of us what it means to take back the seat they tried to steal." I smiled. Because they could replace my chair with a trash can. They could erase my name from invitations. But they could never again erase me.